Hello guys, welcome back to Anime Moments. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Against the Gods based on novel. So let's start explanation. Earlier, Jasmine had said that the boundless universe comprised of countless planets and countless astral planes which were levels above that of planets. The blue polar star was nothing more than one of the countless extremely normal planets. Even if it was suddenly destroyed, in this boundless universe, it was nothing but the disappearance of something similar to a tiny speck of dust, and it could not bring forth even the smallest wave. The blue polar star was comprised of 97% water and 3% land. The domain of the profound sky continent, which in the knowledge of the profound sky residents was especially huge, merely took up 1/100th of the blue polar star's surface. In the boundless universe, it could not even be considered as a speck of dust. In such a huge world, there would always be a possibility for an outrageously strange living being to exist. It might even be possible for a living being which could eat anything to exist. This little red-haired girl in front of him, for example, did not eat wheaten food, and did not eat meat products. Instead, she was actually eating dragon fault. And in regards to this point, by gritting his teeth, he seemed to be barely able to come to terms with this. But dragon fault. Before it was broken, it was an emperor sword. And it was even an emperor profound heavy sword. It had grown while Yunche fought and killed all this while. It had savored upon countless amount of fresh blood, had destroyed numerous boulders, had leveled a mountain, and furthermore, had even shattered countless of armor and weapons. Even if it had currently lost its spiritual consciousness and powerful aura, its degree of tenacity definitely would not drop that much. Even if it was Yunche whose strength had explosively increased, unless he were to make use of the ice flames, it would be hard to use his own strength to destroy it. In regards to using his teeth to bite it apart, even if he were to use all his might, he shouldn't even think about leaving a single scar. However, this little twerp who looked as though did not possess any aura, and even felt that a biscuit was hard to bite on, had actually bit a large chunk of dragon fault with a single mouthful. And then, after chewing 2 to 3 times, she swallowed it down, swallowed it down. Delicious. So delicious. The starving little girl had finally managed to eat a delicacy. Her cheeks flushed from happiness, and even her pair of eyes were emitting out ripples of crimson-red glow. She impatiently took another bite, and with a kabang sound, an even larger chunk of dragon fault's blade was bit off by her. And then, chewing another 2 to 3 times, she swallowed it down. Then, she directly carried dragon fault next to her mouth, opened her mouth wide, and bit it. Like eating corn, she bit it in a horizontal manner, and in a blink of an eye, the part where the blade was bit with numerous holes. Only at this moment did Yunche finally regain his senses from a stoned state. Letting out a strange noise, he pounced over, and snatched the broken dragon fault back from the little girl who was still vigorously biting on it. Seeing the once mighty and peerless sword blade being bitten into a jagged state, not being to find even a single untouched spot from top to bottom, and was even completely stained with shiny saliva, Yunche's heart had almost cried out blood. Ah! That's my food. Return it to me. After her food was coldly snatched away by Yunche, the little girl who was happily eating earlier instantly became anxious, as she leapt and jumped about, trying to snatch the broken sword from Yunche's hands. Frustrated, Yunche widened his eyes, and loudly shouted. Who gave you the permission to eat it? This is dragon fault. Dragon fault. It's not food. But it's clearly yummy food. Hurry and return it to me. Return it to me. The little girl jumped as tried to grab it, and a long strand of saliva was still hanging down by the corner of her lips. However, her body was after all too small. No matter how she jumped, it wasn't sufficient for her to reach Yunche's shoulder height. And at this moment, she suddenly recalled that there was another piece of delicacy on the ground. She closed her mouth, instantly gave up on the piece in Yunche's hands, turned around, and sprinted towards the other broken sword piece. And at this moment, Yunche immediately reacted at the same time as well. His heart trembled, as he charged over with blinding speed. However, even with his speed, he was still a step slower than the little girl. The little girl had already hugged onto the upper broken blade of dragon fault, still effortlessly, and then began to run away. Still thinking of running? Yunche's eyes revealed a fierce light. Although Dragon Fault had been broken, it was still possible to be restored. However, with its lower half already bitten with full of holes, even if it was restored, how would there even be a hint of domineering aura from holding onto a Dragon Fault filled with bite marks? No matter what, he could not allow her to bite on the upper half of the sword blade as well. Furious, Yunche instantly used his maximum speed. However, even with his maximum speed, he realized that he could never approach her. The little girl wildly sprinted, her crimson red hair swept up a long red blur behind her. Her speed was simply quick to the extreme. And, in her embrace, she was still hugging onto Dragon Fault, which was more than 5,000 kilograms in mass. What? What kind of situation was this? Yunche first stared with widened eyes. Right after, he turned completely exasperated, and immediately activated Purgatory. His speed immediately rose explosively, and caught up to the little girl in an instant. The moment the little girl turned her head, and saw that Yunche's hand was just about to grab onto her hair, she instantly cried out. "Ah! You can't steal my delicious food! You can't!" As she cried out, the little girl's speed instantly rose all of a sudden as well. Her entire figure, as though she had turned into a stream of red light, became further and further away from Yunche's line of sight. She had shockingly thrown off Yunche, whose speed had already been raised to the absolute limit, far away. Yunche was completely dumbfounded. Not only was the little girl unbelievably fast, as she wildly sprinted, she was even directly putting Dragon Fault next to her lips, and with incomparably shocking speed, started chewing it. When Yunche heard the clanking sounds, he raised his head, and realized that in a blink of an eye, close to half of the broken Dragon Fault in her hands had already disappeared. At that moment, Yunche's eyeballs were close to falling out. And the remaining half of the broken sword did not escape the fate of being eaten either. As he simply heard the crunch 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 sounds, another small part of it had once again entered the little girl's mouth. That chewing speed of hers could not even be compared by her sprinting speed either. Following after, the crunch 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 munching sounds came again, and even the remaining hilt of Dragon Fault was cleanly eaten by her. After finishing with the Dragon Fault, the little girl finally stopped running, and instantly stopped. She turned around, raised her chest up high, and as she chewed in an intoxicated manner, she unclearly said, "Woo! I finished eating it. It's so delicious. There's no use even if you chase after me again, okay?" Yunche stopped flusteredly as well, and his eyes stared straight at that little girl who carried a pure, satisfied expression. That gaze of his was as though he was looking at a little monster. Oh, that's not right. It's a huge monster. That strength which could casually carry Dragon Fault which weighed 5,000 kilograms, and that speed which he could not catch up no matter what he did. The key point was that teeth that could eat Dragon Fault as though it was candy. This seemingly tender and frail little girl who did not have any presence of life, nor any energy aura. Just what kind of monster was she? And forget about the weight of the half-piece of Dragon Fault, just by its size, it was seemingly comparable to this little girl's height. However, after she ate the entire thing, her stomach actually did not look bloated in the slightest. Just where did it go? However, to the current Yunche, the anger in his heart had slightly suppressed his astonishment. The upper half of Dragon was completely eaten by the little girl, while the lower half was bitten full of holes as well. There was definitely no possibility of Dragon Fault being restored any longer. However, the culprit for this entire mess was, after all, merely a little girl of tender age. The naive and spirited look in her eyes were impossible for anyone to not love them, and Yunche was completely unable to harm her in the slightest. Instead, he could only roar out loudly. Why you? You little brat? Didn't I say that you're not allowed to eat it? It's not food, it's my sword, Dragon Fault. It's something very important to me. How can you eat it? But, it's a really yummy food." With Yunche's loud roar, and his completely reddened face, he seemed to be really angry. The little girl's snow-white neck slightly shrank, as she weakly said, "Woo, big brother, can you not scold me? It's just a really tasty sword. At the very most, I can give you one back. What tasty sword? That's dragon fault. Yunche roared out in grief. It's not just a mere sword, it's a companion and friend which had accompanied for many years. It's the most important thing by my side. There's only one in the entire world. When you ate it, it's gone forever, so how are you going to give it back to me? The more he thought about it now, the more he felt that being a busybody and saving this little brat was the worst decision he had ever made in his entire life. In just a short span of time after he saved her, he could forget about receiving something in return, and he could forget about how troublesome this matter was as well, but she actually ate his dragon fault. The little girl's neck once again shrank back, however, her little face revealed an unsatisfied expression. With her nose raised, she said, "What I will give you in return is more incredible than the one I ate earlier." HMPH. After saying that, a crimson-red light suddenly radiated from her body. Within the light, she slowly floated up in the air, and her entire figure was completely enveloped by red light. Following after, the red light exploded apart in the sky, and then, completely dispersed. Yunche's pair of eyes was once again largely widened. The number of times he was shocked on this day was most probably more than the number of times added up in several years. Following after the dispersal of the red light, the little girl's figure had completely disappeared. Floating in the sky, what appeared in Yunche's eyes was shockingly a crimson-red odd-shaped gigantic sword. The entire sword was completely crimson-red in color. The blade was filled with rows of messy deep red inscriptions, and an extremely light layer of obscure red glow was enveloping it as well. The length of the blade was more than 9 feet, which was larger than Dragon Fault by 30%. And with this length, it had even surpassed an absolutely large number of spear-related weapons. The sword of the hilt was straight and bulky, and above the hilt, the base of the blade was shockingly more than 2 feet in width. Moving up the blade, the width of the blade irregularly shrank, and at the end of the blade, it had already shrank into an incomparably sharp tip, radiating with a cold, crimson-red light. It was larger than both the Overlord's colossal sword and Dragon Fault, however, different from the heavy and thick blade tip of the Overlord's colossal sword and Dragon Fault. It was actually incomparably sharp, enough to produce a piercing strike with immense penetrative power. However, putting aside its outer appearance, this sword actually completely lacked an imposing atmosphere. It was lifeless without a single hint of aura emitting from it, as though it was crafted from nothing more than the most normal profound metal. Yunche's eyes widened, completely dumbfounded. What he was shocked about was naturally not because of the sword itself, rather, it was because this sword was transformed by that little girl right in front of his eyes. The gigantic crimson-red sword swirled around in the air, and then, with the sword tip pointing downwards, it descended under Yunche's stunned gaze. With a light sound, the blade tip deeply stabbed into the ground at the bottom, which was extremely hard itself. And even though the part where the blade tip had stabbed into the ground, the straight and gigantic crimson-red sword was still much taller than Yunche. The top of Yunche's head was only comparable to the bottom of the sword hilt. Following after its descent, Yunche realized that at the bottom of the gigantic crimson-red sword's hilt, at the center of the widest part of the sword, a marble of about 17 to 18 centimeters in diameter was embedded in it. Within the marble, astonishingly, he saw the little girl who had disappeared. The height of her body had already turned into about 17 centimeters tall, and although she had turned especially pocket-sized, her clothes, the color of her hair, her face, and even her eyes could still be seen clearly. She, who was within the marble, placed her hands on both sides of her waist, and laughed out loud triumphantly. He. I succeeded. I succeeded. As expected, I'm really amazing. Big brother, did you see it? Isn't it much better than that, farmer faulty thing? It's Dragon Fault. Yunche's voice slightly trembled. Possessing frightening strength, with speed that Yunche was not able to catch up to, and eating up Dragon Fault, the little girl now revealed to him her fourth ability. She could actually turn into a sword. Furthermore, it was a sword that was bigger than the Overlord's colossal sword and Dragon Fault. And such a huge sword could only be called a heavy sword. After turning into sword, she could still make a miniature version of herself appear within it. Yunche was currently feeling faint and even wondered whether he was dreaming. Although there were many mysteries in the boundless universe, this was still too outrageous. Yunche stared at the scarlet greatsword. Beside him rang the sounds of the girl's satisfied flaunting. In his shock, he couldn't even tell what the girl was shouting about. He looked from up to down, from left to right, unable to describe how he felt. With his experiences from 2 lifetimes and the calmness he got after being baptized by the spatial storm, he was still unable to comprehend this creepy matter that was in accordance to the laws of life and the world. When he looked carefully again, he suddenly saw that on the 2 sides of the core pearl, each side was imprinted with a word. The 2 words were both deep red and completely the same as the patterns that were imprinted on the blade. If one did not look carefully, they would very easily miss it. The 2 words were, on the left, devil, and on the right, slayer. Slayer devil. No, it should be devil slayer. Yunche muttered. What? Devil slayer. Yunche's muttering caused a huge reaction from the pondering Jasmine as she instantly came beside Yunche and asked, "Where did you see those 2 words?" Yunche pointed towards the left and right of the core pearl. Jasmine's gaze swept past the words, Devil Slayer, as deep shock appeared on her face. "You know this sword?" Yunche asked immediately. Jasmine didn't answer him but instead still stared at the deep scarlet greatsword, as though she was trying very hard to remember something. After some time, she finally said softly, "Could it be?" Halfway through speaking, Jasmine suddenly looked up and said, "Go look at the other side of the sword, see if it's the words, Devil Slayer, as well." Yunche nodded and swiftly turned the sword to the other side. At the same position, he found another 2 similarly colored words. However, the 2 words were not devil and slayer. The left side was heaven, and the right was smiting. Smiting heaven. Yunche muttered and frowned. No, from the position of the words, it should be heaven smiting. Heaven smiting devil slayer? Heaven smiting? How could it be those 2 words? Seeing the words, heaven smiting, Jasmine's expression changed drastically as shock and confusion appeared together on her face. Could I be wrong? No. This feeling, it obviously is. Jasmine, what exactly did you figure out? Do you know this sword's, or this little girl's origins? Yunche asked in confusion. I'm not sure. Jasmine slowly shook her head. My previous guess was too whimsical and the words, heaven smiting, threw my guess off by nearly 90%. You don't have to ask anymore. What I'm guessing, even if I explain to you, would only serve to confuse you and not clarify matters. However, I do understand why there aren't any signs of life on her. Why? Because it's highly likely she's not human. Nor is she any ordinary living being. Jasmine slowly explained, she's probably a celestial spirit that exceeds any living being. Celestial spirit? This was the first time Yunche had heard of this concept. The strength of a living being needs to be built upon cultivation, but for a celestial spirit, they possess exceptional powers of heaven and earth at birth. However, the existence of celestial spirits had already been extinct since the ancient era, and should not exist within this era. I have only heard of them from my brother. However, this girl is from the ancient era and has many peculiarities. Even with my understanding, I cannot explain them. Therefore, she's likely a being that isn't from a normal clan of the ancient era, and her characteristics are similar to the celestial spirits that my brother described. Therefore, I think there is at least a 50% chance she come from a celestial spirit clan from the ancient era. Jasmine's words were very calm, but Yunche could still hear the hesitation in her voice. Because even if it was Jasmine, she had never interacted with a celestial spirit before, and what she said were all merely speculation. And with Jasmine's profound realm and knowledge, if she was stunned by the girl's peculiarities, any guess, no matter how ridiculous, would not be too overly exaggerated. Go and try the sword, Jasmine said suddenly. The scarlet greatsword did not possess any aura, nor was it imposing. Even though it was massive, it didn't possess any overbearing aura that a heavy sword should have. Yunche placed one of his hand on the sword's hilt and casually grabbed it. The scarlet greatsword did not move one bit. Although it was a casual grab, with Yunche's arm strength, he at least possessed a few thousand kilograms of strength, yet he was unable to move this unimposing greatsword at all. Yunche was stunned as his face revealed great shock. After he recovered from the shock, he stood up properly, placed both his hands on the sword hilt and activated the Purgatory Gate. All his profound strength and arm strength gathered to both his arms. Ha! Yunche howled as his arms began to rise. Under his full strength, the scarlet greatsword was lifted off the ground as he swung the sword to create a slash, leaving behind a scarlet trajectory. Holding onto the scarlet greatsword in midair, his muscles tightened and his veins bulged. He felt that he was not holding onto a sword, but a mountain. The weight he felt in his arms was at least 10 times that of Dragon Fault. It was at least 100,000 kilograms. If it were not for the fourth stage of the Great Way of the Buddha granting him 50,000 kilograms of arm strength, and using his own strength and profound strength, he probably would not be able to lift this sword at all. The brat was only 20 to 30 kilograms and he could lift her with half a finger. How could she turn into a sword that was this heavy? Although this scarlet greatsword was bigger than Dragon Fault, it was at most bigger by 30%, yet it was at least 10 times heavier. The concentration of its strength should be frightening, but why was it not imposing at all? The weight on both his arms reminded him of the first time he wielded the Overlord's colossal sword. He gritted his teeth and concentrated his strength on his arms, then began to swing the scarlet greatsword around. The moment he started swinging, the aura became imposing, as though it was a raging ocean's waves banging heavily onto shore. The burst of the sword was as deafening as a thunderstrike. One could only imagine the destructive power of being hit by the sword. Wah, wah, wah. So fun. Fun, fun. Wooer, why do I feel dizzy? The immense weight did not cause Yunche to retreat, but instead made him even more excited. Even the increasingly intense vibrations were thrown to the back of his mind. Only when the excited sound of the little girl rang did his motion stop, reminding him that this sword was transformed from the little girl. Quick, drop your blood onto the sword. A drop is sufficient. Jasmine's voice suddenly sounded, and it was using the soul transmission that no one else could hear. Although he did not know why Jasmine's shout sounded serious, Yunche did not ask too much and immediately condensed a drop of blood from the tip of his finger, dropping it onto the scarlet greatsword. The moment the drop of blood touched the scarlet greatsword, Jasmine, who was behind Yunche, immediately stacked her hands together and displayed a weird hand seal. In the palm of her hand, a deep blood-like red glow flashed. At the same instant, the blood that was dripping down the sword stopped, entered the core of the sword, and completely disappeared. Jasmine's actions completely avoided Yunche's vision and spiritual sense, causing him to not detect anything. He only felt a weird energy fluctuation for an instant. Why do I feel so weird? The girl sounded slightly confused. The scarlet greatsword on Yunche's hand flashed with a red light and disappeared. The red-haired, red-clothed young girl reappeared, and when she landed, she did not immediately acknowledge Yunche. Instead, she held her face and bit her finger unintentionally, seemingly thinking very hard about something. The scarlet greatsword disappeared, but the heavy feeling still lingered on his arm. His heart was unable to calm down from his excitement. Although wielding this scarlet greatsword was still slightly straining for him, when he was able to fully wield it, with this sword in hand, his explosive power would be far beyond that of Dragon Fault. If this was only a heavy sword, Yunche would do whatever it took to get it. But this sword was actually not a sword. Little girl, you're really very strong. Yunche changed from his angry and wild expression to a more gentle one and said. He suddenly felt that it was important for him to build a good relationship with the girl. The girl looked up at him with a muddled expression before tilting her head. Why do I feel weird? Why, eh? Where do you feel weird? Yunche asked. I don't know, I just feel weird. She looked at Yunche and said with a serious expression, I seem to like you more. Being liked by a super beauty like me, do you feel happy? Little girl, Yunche touched his face, speaking in a more serious tone than her. In my previous life, I already knew my charms. From the innocent little lollers to the invincible old virgins, liking me is a very, very normal thing. Therefore, you don't have to think that it's weird at all. Little lowly? Old virgin? What are those? The girl seemed confused before she suddenly shook her head. I forbid you from calling me little girl. It's not nice sounding at all. What should I call you then? Call me little beauty. You really don't remember your name? Of course not, I already said I don't. Then, how about I give you a name? Name me? The girl's eyes sparkled as she grew excited. Okay. But it must be a nice and cute name that I like. Yunche looked at the girl's red clothes, red hair, red eyes, even her favorite color was red. He thought for a while and said, then I'll call you Honga. 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 The girl repeated the name several times. Her eyes sparkled even more as she replied in high spirits, then, call me Honga next time. He. I have a name. Honga Honga. Next time don't call me little girl, or little brat, not even little beauty. You can only call me Honga. Seeing how unusually excited she became, it was obvious to see that she was very satisfied with the name. In regards to the name Honga, it was simple and rolled off the tongue, not to mention that it really suited this little brat. Seeing her satisfied look, Yunche naturally felt very satisfied in his heart as well. Just a moment ago, he was still regretting that he saved this abandoned child who ate his dragon fault, but now, after he had witnessed that scarlet greatsword and had seen her current expression, he seemingly had the urge to drool. However, wielding a dead sword was easy, but wielding a sword that was alive, like this one. To be more precise, this was a living person. It was basically a completely different concept. Just as he was beginning to think of how he was going to have this little brat listen to him obediently, with a heavy tone, Jasmine suddenly said, hurry and plant a subjugation profound imprint on her. The same subjugation profound imprint used to form a subjugation contract with a profound beast. MN. Yunche blanked. What do you mean? It's very simple. You only have to plant a seal of contract on her body, similar to forming a contract with a profound beast, and you will be able to form a master-slave contract with her. With you as the master. Jasmine lightly said. This, Yunche was surprised in his heart. But that's a method to subdue profound beasts. She's human, not a profound beast, so how could a contract be formed this way? HMPH, she's not a mere human. Jasmine coldly said. If you were to directly cast a seal of contract, even if she doesn't resist, it would still be completely effective. But, just now, the blood you sprinkled on the sword has already been imprinted within her soul. Now, if you were to set the contracted profound seal, the contracted profound seal will quickly merge with the blood that you have left in her soul, and it will be imprinted within her soul forever. Unless you remove it on your own accord, she will never be able to escape from this contract. Hearing Jasmine's words, Yunche's mind was in a complete mess. How could the blood which he had sprinkled onto the scarlet greatsword according to Jasmine's instructions, be imprinted onto Honga's soul? And it could even correspondingly merge with the contracted profound seal? The contracted profound seal which was used to form a contract with profound beasts, could be effective on humans as well? What's up with all that? Do it according to my instructions this instant. Jasmine did not have the slightest intention of joking around. Currently, she has lost all of her memories, so the concept of a contracted profound seal is completely foreign to her. When she woke up, the first person she saw was you as well, so in her subconsciousness, she's extremely close to you, and is completely defenseless against you. Hence, as long as you provide a little guidance, she shouldn't resist you. This is a heavenly opportunity that's hard to come by even in 1,000,000 years. If her memories were to suddenly return, and you wish to form a master-slave contract with her then, that will be a completely impossible matter. Yunche finally understood Jasmine's words. His heart was greatly stirred, but, he still hesitantly said. This isn't really a good idea, right? Right now, she doesn't have her memories. If I were to take this opportunity, and it really succeeds, it seemed to be a little too unfair to her. HMPH, isn't tricking girls the thing you do the most? But now, you're actually beginning to act like a gentleman. Jasmine said with a cold smile. These few words which Jasmine casually mentioned had completely shattered the morals which had finally managed to sprout in Yunche. Jasmine would often say several shocking things that overturned his understanding and knowledge, however, she had never lied to him either. If Honga could really be subjugated just like a contracted beast like she had said. Honga wasn't the key point. The key point was that she could change into that sword. What's wrong with you? Why did you suddenly stop talking? Honga tiptoed, raised her little white, tender hands, and shook them in front of his eyes. Yunche regained his senses at that moment. Bending down, he said with a smile. Honga, let's discuss something, all right? Discuss something? Honga tilted her head. Just now, you ate my dragon fault, and then you said that you will pay me back, right? Yunche still carried that smile on his face. Honga nodded. However, looking at her expression, she had evidently raised her guard. Since Honga nodded, she had made it easier for him to say the following words. Yunche then slowly continued. Dragon Fault is my weapon. Since Dragon Fault has been eaten by you, I no longer have any weapons that I can use. Since you said that you will pay me back, then in the future, when I need to use a weapon, you have to transform into that sword earlier. Is this agreeable? Honga is a beautiful young lady, and a beautiful young lady must keep her words. Honga blinked, and pondered very deeply for a moment. Then, she actually nodded. It's that easy? She's actually so obedient? Honga agreed to it too simply, which caused Yunche to instead feel a little speechless. At this moment, Honga said out very loudly. Although just now, it was really fun in that form, I don't want to just listen to your words for nothing. Unless, you promise me 3 conditions. Conditions? This little brat who looked absolutely naive and completely schemeless, actually wanted to talk conditions with him. What conditions? This time, it was Yunche who raised his guard. They are really simple. Honga raised her little face and stretched out a white, tender finger. 1. You must play with me often, you can't ignore me. 2. You must find me various tasty food every day, you're not allowed to make me hungry, nor are you allowed to be petty. 3. You can't throw me aside and run away like what happened earlier, nor are you allowed to scold me. Yunche was instantly speechless. These 3 conditions were clear, straight to the point and easily understood. Everything in regards to food and fun were all covered. This little brat totally wasn't as dense and stupid as she looked. All right. Yunche acted as though he was hesitant for a moment, before he nodded in agreement. Eh? Really? You really agree to everything, and will keep to your promises? Seeing Yunche nodding, Honga's eyes sparkled. Her tender lips opened, and instantly shouted out in excitement. Of course, I keep to my promises. But you must be obedient as well. When I want you to turn into a sword, you definitely mustn't not listen to me. Yunche said very sternly. Yay! Honga happily cheered and then nodded like a little chick pecking for rice. Amen. As long as I get to play and eat many tasty food, then I will definitely be the most obedient. Woo, Honga placed her pair of hands on her cheeks, and her eyes flashed with sparkles. Right now, I'm hungry again. That thing called Farmer Faulty earlier, there still seems to be half of it. Can I eat it now? It's Dragon Fault. Yunche took out the lower half of Dragon Fault, and his heart still ached from looking at the bite marks on it. Thinking back, Dragon Fault was unimaginably imposing in his own hands. They, 1 person and 1 sword, obtained the top position in the Blue Wind ranking tournament, exterminated Fen Moli, Fen Ijue, shook Frozen Cloud Asgard, destroyed the entire Burning Heaven clan, defeated Ling Qianni, and furthermore, in the 7-nation ranking tournament, they swept across a crowd of mighty foes, shaking the entire world. They were basically beyond awe-inspiring. He could put aside the fact that it had broken, but it had actually turned into this little brat's food. Old friend, it has been hard on you. In any case, your other half has already entered her stomach, just take it as though I'm sending you into her stomach in order to reunite you. Yunche groaned in his heart. he did not give to her immediately. Instead, he hid it behind his back, and said, "I can give you the other half now, but you have to fulfill a small promise for me as well." Seeing the other half of Dragonfolt and smelling its aura, Honga's saliva instantly flowed down. As she forcefully gulped her saliva, she anxiously said, "What is it? What is it? Close your eyes, and in the next 20 seconds, no matter what I do to you, you're not allowed to resist." Simple, right? Yunche bent his waist, revealed a smiling face, and said with incomparable gentleness, 20 seconds, and I'm not allowed to resist? Eh? Honga's tender and small body shrank back, and her little hands grabbed onto the corner of her skirt as she gave a vigilant look. Could it be, you're trying to molest me? No, no, no. I'm a little beautiful lady with the purest body, I don't want to be molested at all. Molest? This brat actually knows about molestation. Who said I wanted to molest you? Sweat constantly dripped down from Yunche's forehead. I simply want to touch the center of your forehead with my hand, and that's it. Ah? Honga looked doubtful, as she stretched her hand and touched the center of her forehead. Why do you want to touch this spot? Because I love touching that spot of other people the most, especially when it belongs to a cute, beautiful little lady. Yunche said with great difficulty. Is that so? Honga pondered for a moment. Being touched at the center of the forehead, and then being able to eat the delicious Dragonfolt right after, no matter how she thought about it, it was a really great deal. Okay. But after touching it, you have to let me eat Farmer Faulty. You definitely mustn't go back on your words. It's Dragonfolt. Yunche roared out in his heart. Since Honga had agreed to it, then it was much easier to handle. He nodded, and slowly said, All right. First, close your eyes. That's right, you're not allowed to open them. A moment later, no matter what happens, you're not allowed to resist. Don't worry, other than the center of your forehead, I will not touch anywhere else, nor will I molest you. Honga stood in front of Yunche, and closed her eyes according to his instructions. It was unknown if it was because she was too naive, or she did not have any defense against Yunche in her subconsciousness, but not only did she not feel disturbed, she instead carried curiosity and expectation on her face. Yunche took a small breath, condensed a pearl of blood at the tip of his finger, and then gently tapped on the center of Honga's forehead. In an instant, a small-scaled contracted profound seal appeared at the center of her forehead. The entire process was completely the same as forming a contract with a completely subjugated profound beast. Did it really succeed? Although he had always trusted Jasmine the most, he still carried a deep doubt in his subconsciousness. After all, this was simply a little too outrageous. With the appearance of the contracted profound seal, as long as Honga carried the slightest of will to resist it, the contracted profound seal would be instantly expelled by her. Even if this contracted profound seal was really effective against human lives, then, as long as one person sensed that the other party had cast such a contracted profound seal on him, he would definitely expel it with incomparable force. Because no one would be willing to become dependent on others like a profound beast. However, this conclusion did not happen on Honga. After the profound contracted seal that came from Yunche rotated 3 times at the center of Honga's forehead, carrying his drop of blood, it entered the center of Honga's forehead with incomparable success, until it completely disappeared. In that short moment, a form of spiritual connection with Honga had also appeared with incomparable clarity within his soul. This form of spiritual connection seemed to be the same as the spiritual connection he had with the Snow Phoenix in the past. It succeeded? It actually succeeded for real. The back of Yunche's left hand flashed with a red light as an inch-long red profound imprint slowly appeared. And the shape of this profound mark was clearly a miniature size of that scarlet greatsword. After this profound imprint appeared, it once again slowly dimmed, and disappeared without a trace. Eh? Honga felt the abnormality and opened her eyes, which widened in confusion. It seems like something weird is happening. Yunche looked at Honga, and focused his spirit, testing out the command to withdraw. Suddenly the sword-shaped profound seal on the back of his hand flashed. Honga let out a cry, and her entire person morphed into a red beam of light which flew into the profound seal. Yunche raised his arm and looked at the sword-shaped profound seal on the back of his hand and stood there, dazed. It actually, really, worked. Honga! He shouted in a low voice. Suddenly, the profound seal flashed once more, and the beam of red light was released and transformed back into Honga's body. Her mouth gaped open, and she tried to strongly blink her eyes as she was obviously still in a muddled state. Become a sword. As his will was transmitted, Honga's body flared up with light once more, and her small and delicate body morphed into a huge scarlet heavy sword. Yunche extended his palm and he reached out with his mind once more, causing the scarlet greatsword to autonomously fly into his grasp. He used both hands to grasp the scarlet greatsword, and he could feel a shocking heaviness. His heart echoed the words he had just chanted to himself. It actually, really, worked. But this time, the scarlet greatsword in his hand suddenly started to struggle against his grip, and as the sword swung itself, it forcefully escaped from his grasp. The red light flashed once again and the sword once more turned back into the little girl, Honga. Yunche stood in amazement. What had happened? She could struggle herself free? You mean she wasn't like a normal contracted profound beast, that was completely under the owner's control? She could rebel? Once Honga materialized, she began to examine her own body in a rushed and haphazard manner. Once she discovered that there were no abnormalities, she crooked her head and said with uncertainty, "It's so strange, it seems like my body isn't listening to me. Big brother, did you do anything to me?" As Yunche was about to explain the situation to her, she instead twinkled her eyes in joy and said with a laugh, "But it's really, really fun. Big brother, won't you please play with me again?" Without waiting for Yunche's reply, she followed up with a self-serving demand, "Hey! No, this isn't right. Delicious food, there is still delicious food. Hurry and give Farmer Faulty to me to eat. You already promised me. You can't go back on your word." Being able to plant a contracted profound seal on her, and being able to withdraw her into the seal, summon her, then make her transform into a sword. If this had happened to a normal person, it would be enough to scare said person out of his wits. But Honga only experienced a short daze, and even said that it was fun. Not only that, she promptly threw these experiences to the back of her mind. What exactly were her nerves made of? Yunche took out Dragon Fault and said with a strange expression on his face, "You can take it to eat." What? Honga received Dragon Fault and began dancing excitedly. She had eaten the other half of Dragon Fault while being chased around by Yunche, so she had to swallow it whole. But this time, she could eat with no pressure at all. Naturally, her eating speed slowed by a lot. Her small and delicate soft pink lips and delicate and pearly white teeth easily gobbled up Dragon Fault, which was more resilient than profound iron. This picture caused Yunche's spirit to receive an unimaginable impact. Rumble. The tremors in space began to strengthen and a tiny dimensional tear had already begun to form in the air. The primordial profound arc's repulsion field had arrived. Hurry and keep her in the profound seal. Because of her unique physique, she might not be affected by the primordial profound arc's repulsion field. Jasmine said hurriedly. Yunche furrowed his brows and quickly sent a mental order for Honga to return to the profound seal. Honga, who had been happily eating, let out a dissatisfied cry. Then, she, along with the other half of Dragon Fault, morphed into the red light and returned to the profound seal. At practically the same time, a strong and irresistible force carried Yunche up, and threw him into the dimensional vortex which had appeared out of nowhere. After suffering a full 18 months within the spatial turbulence, a mere dimensional vortex was not even worth mentioning to Yunche. He closed his eyes and let himself be moved by the dimensional vortex with a heart full of apprehensiveness. What kind of world would he be brought to exactly? Profound Sky Continent, Blue Wind Nation. The Divine Phoenix Empire had launched a massive invasion without warning, setting all four corners of the Blue Wind Nation ablaze with war. New Moon City was the central region's hub. Once news of its occupation had spread, the citizens of Blue Wind Nation descended into a greater state of panic. Navy Tide, Sunflower Dew, Divine Incense, Grand Ashura, and Black Fiend coalition of 5 nations kept receiving request after request for help from Blue Wind Nation. However, They all kept silent. It was unknown whether they had forgotten the simple concept of, if the lips are gone, the teeth will be cold, and the 6 nations' interdependence on one another, or if they were simply too scared of any possible reprisal from the divine Phoenix Empire. And 90% of the large profound sects within Blue Wind Nation had chosen to defect, because any resistance would only end in their total destruction. Even though surrendering was shameful, they could at least preserve the foundations that had been laid for hundreds of years. Those sects which rose up in resistance or joined the army were actually those smaller and weaker ones, the sects without any famous background or influence. The strongest sect, the only one which the divine Phoenix Empire would fear, Heavenly Sword Villa, had instead chosen to seal their doors and lock themselves in when Blue Wind Nation was in such a predicament. This war had brutally exposed the naked selfishness of humanity. Facing the overwhelming strong divine Phoenix Empire without any assistance from outside or from the profound world, there was no possibility that Blue Wind Nation could muster any form of resistance. Under the command of Blue Wind Empress, who withstood the divine Phoenix Empire without backing down or compromising, Blue Wind Nation had managed to endure thus far. This was already a deeply astonishing miracle to all 7 nations. Even though every single Blue Wind citizen could smell the dying embers of their nation, Empress Kinyu had become the brightest moon in their dark sky, and she had earned their boundless respect. Even though she might soon become the ruler of a conquered nation, she would forever have a place in the annals of the profound sky continent. At the western frontier of Blue Wind Nation, location already engulfed in the flames of war, a young man with shoulder-length hair dressed in pitch-black clothes came striding through the flames. His steps were ponderous, his gait stiff and heavy, the expression on his face incomparably cold and hard. This coldness was especially prominent in his eyes. It was as sharp and cold as a cold blade of the 9 hells. If anyone glanced at his eyes, chills would be sent down their spine. And if anyone peered into his eyes, they would discover that his pupils stirred with an aberrant black light. This was a place that had been baptized by the fires of battle. It was a desolate plain, and even the odd building that was still standing was completely ruined. There were a few travelers, all of whom bore a face etched with despair and hopelessness. War should not harm the common people. The divine Phoenix Empire had attacked with an unbecoming haste, and their great army swept through the land, completely disregarding the safety of these helpless civilians. The black-clothed youth's every movement was possessed of an unparalleled uniformity. And his entire journey thus far had, astonishingly, been traveled in a completely straight line. When people saw him, they would unconsciously shrink away from him and maintain the furthest distance possible. After walking for a long while, he finally chanced on an inn which was still in reasonable condition. His steps slowly came to a halt and he entered the inn. There was already famine everywhere, with refugees being forced to leave. Thus, there was no more customers for the inn to receive, and the inn was not going to be able to operate for much longer. The innkeeper sat listlessly at the shop counter, his sighs unceasing. But all of a sudden, his body felt an intense cold which came out of nowhere, and his heart suddenly tightened up. He raised his head and saw the black-clothed youth who had entered the inn. Someone who opened an inn would naturally be worldly and knowledgeable. The unprecedented fear invoked by the black-clothed youth immediately informed the innkeeper that this young man was definitely one terrifying character. He hurriedly strode out from behind his counter and took the initiative to welcome the young man. He said in the calmest voice possible, "Will this young master be staying here? Where is Yun-che?" The black-clothed youth did not look at him directly and spat out words which were as cold and still as stagnant water. Yun-che? The innkeeper said in a careful voice, trying to keep his fear in check. "Which Yun-che?" "Of course it is the Yun-che that destroyed the Burning Heaven clan," the black-clothed youth said in a voice that suddenly became even colder. "Ah?" Well, the innkeeper looked at him with shock and suspicion, but hurriedly lowered his head and replied, "I do not understand this esteemed customer's question. Prince Consort Yun-che, isn't he already dead?" The name Yun-che was naturally known to all within the Blue Wind Nation. 2 years ago, the 7-nation ranking tournament had caused his name to send shockwaves throughout the profound Sky 7 nations. But swiftly following this illustrious news was the information that he had been buried within the primordial profound ark. "What did you say?" The innkeeper's words caused the unstirring young man to explode like a sudden peal of thunder. He grabbed the collar of the innkeeper with one hand, and easily lifted up the innkeeper's body, which weighed over 200 kilograms. His dark eyes let out a fiendish light as he shouted, "You said he is dead. You said Yunche is dead." The innkeeper felt as if he had been dropped into ice, and he nearly pissed his pants in fright right there. Esteemed customer, please do not be angry. Prince Consort Yun has indeed died. He had already died 2 years ago. This matter, the entire continent knows of it. Esteemed customer, please spare my life, please spare my life. The black-clothed youth's hands shook, and his face distorted in an incomparably terrifying way. He spoke in a hoarse voice, "Dead? How can he possibly be dead? Tell me. How did he die? How did he die? He died in the Divine Phoenix Empire. 7 Nation Ranking Tournament. Primordial Profound Arc. I heard that it was to save the Divine Phoenix Empire's Princess Snow. He was buried in the Primordial Profound Arc. The innkeeper had been badly startled, his whole body convulsed and his speech became incoherent. Ah! The black-clothed youth let out a furious yell, then sent the innkeeper flying with a wave of his arm. The innkeeper's body flew through the wall, and there was no sign of movement after that. It was unknown if he was dead or alive. Dead. 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 He is actually dead. Ha. Ha ha. Ha 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 ha. Dead. The black-clothed youth's entire body spasmed as he kept repeating those words to himself. His entire demeanor was in disarray and he started to howl with laughter. After the laughter, his expression transformed into one filled with pain. It was as if he had suddenly turned insane. Why? Why is he actually dead? The black-clothed youth raised his head and howled in agony. After 3 years of rending flesh and tearing the soul, and enduring countless hellish purgatories, I had finally awaited for this day to arrive. But why is he dead? Dead. Who will I take revenge on then? Ah! The black-clothed youth let out a huge roar and, all of a sudden, a column of pitch-black smoke rose from his body. Within the smoke, the wooden table near his feet soundlessly rotted away. The white bowl on the table turned pitch black, and afterwards dissolved into a black powder which was carried away by the wind. After his roar had subsided and he regained his sense, one name appeared within his mind. Floating Cloud City. Floating Cloud City, the black-clothed youth muttered in a low and deep voice, "Yunche. You exterminated my entire clan. This grudge will last for an eternity. Since I can't kill you anymore, then I will simply slaughter all the people in your clan." The black-clothed youth started flying as he broke through the roof of the inn, shooting out like a black arrow in the direction of the east, making his way directly to Floating Cloud City. Episode 83 is end here. Next episode coming tomorrow. Thanks for watching.